Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we are going deep on a rivalry. That's always been kind of like a friendly one, I guess you could say. Definitely more about really great branding and the occasional mistake than like actual, bad blood between the two companies. And that is, of course, the epic clash between Coca-Cola and Pepsi.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I mean, these are two brands that have been competing fiercely for well over a century. But at the same time, there's always been a sense of mutual respect there, and maybe even a bit of a wink-wink, nudge-nudge, understanding that they both kind of need each other to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the beverage industry.
Totally. And what's really fascinating is that we're going to be diving into this rivalry using a podcast episode called Brand Wars Coke versus Pepsi, the Soda Civil War, which is a fantastic source for this kind of deep dive. And our mission is basically to pull out the most interesting and insightful bits from this whole saga for you, the listener. Because let's be honest, the history of Coke and Pepsi is pretty much a microcosm of the history of marketing and consumer culture in the 20th and 21st centuries, right?
Absolutely. And what's really striking to me is that both of these global beverage behemoths, they both actually started out in the late 1800s, like way back when. Ideas about medicine and refreshment and even ingredients were pretty different from what we have today.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, imagine trying to launch a new drink with cocaine in it today, right?
Yeah, that would probably not go over too well with the FBA.
Not at all. Okay, so let's rewind the clock back to 1886 when Coca-Cola first hit the scene. It was the brainchild of an Atlanta pharmacist named John Stiff Pemberton. And now get this wasn't your average soda fountain drink back then. The original formula for Coke actually contained cocaine. Yep, you heard that right.
It's amazing how times have changed, isn't it?
It really is, but back then cocaine wasn't seen as this like super dangerous drug. It was actually used in a bunch of different tonics and remedies, and people thought it had all sorts of health benefits. So Pemberton was marketing Coca-Cola as a nerve tonic and a headache cure. Can you believe that?
I mean, it makes sense in the context of the time, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But it's still kind of mind-blowing to think about Coca-Cola starting out as like a medicinal beverage and then becoming this like global icon of, sugary refreshment.
It's a real testament to the power of branding and marketing that they were able to completely transform the image of the product over time.
Totally. And you know what's even crazier? Around the same time that Coke was getting started, another pharmacist named Caleb Bradham down in North Carolina was cooking up his own special beverage, which eventually became Pepsi. So here you have these two pharmacists both basically stumbling upon this like massive global market for fizzy drinks almost by accident.
Yeah, it's like they were both in the right place at the right time with the right idea, and they just sort of rode the wave of this growing consumer demand for sweet and bubbly drinks.
Exactly. And for a long time, Coca-Cola was the undisputed king of the cola world. They had that first mover advantage, and their brand was just synonymous with, soda in general.
But then in the 1970s, Pepsi came up with this really clever marketing campaign called the Pepsi Challenge. And it basically involved setting up blind taste tests where people would try Coke and Pepsi without knowing which one was which. And surprisingly, a lot of people actually preferred the taste of Pepsi.
Yeah, that Pepsi challenge really shook things up in the cola wars because up until that point, Coke had kind of been coasting on their reputation and brand recognition, but suddenly people were realizing that, hey, maybe Pepsi actually tastes better.
And I think what's really interesting about the Pepsi challenge is that it highlighted the fact that taste is subjective, right? What one person finds delicious, another person might find kind of bland or even off-putting. So it really forced Coke to take a hard look at their product and think about how they could appeal to a wider range of taste buds.
And so what did Coke do? Well, in 1985, they decided to make a pretty drastic move. They launched New Coke, which was a sweeter version of their classic formula designed to directly compete with Pepsi in those blind taste tests.
Yeah, I remember that whole New Coke debacle. It was a huge gamble for Coca-Cola, and it ended up backfiring spectacularly.
It was like a total PR disaster. People were outraged. They felt like Coke was messing with something sacred, and they just wanted the original formula back.
It's a classic example of what can happen when a company tries to fix something that isn't broken. I mean, Coke had this incredibly loyal customer base who loved the original taste, and they just weren't ready for a change, especially not a change that they felt was being forced upon them.
So after just a few bursts of intense backlash, Coke had to cave, and they brought back the original formula under the name Coca-Cola Classic, which I think is still what they call it today, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I think they learned their lesson about messing with a winning formula.
They definitely did. So after all that drama, both Coke and Pepsi really doubled down on their marketing efforts, and one of the biggest battlegrounds became celebrity endorsements. I mean, the logic is pretty simple, right? You get a famous person to associate themselves with your product, and hopefully some of their star power rubs off on the brand.
Right, and Pepsi in particular really went all in on this strategy. I mean, they had Michael Jackson in the 80s, Britney Spears in the 90s, Beyonce in the 2000s, and more recently Kendall Jenner. So they were clearly targeting a younger demographic and trying to stay on top of the latest trends.
And, I think it worked for them to a certain extent. I mean, those celebrity endorsements definitely generated a lot of buzz and helped Pepsi maintain its image as the cooler, more youthful alternative to Coke.
But there's always a risk that comes with celebrity endorsements, right? Because celebrities are human beings and they make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes can reflect poorly on the brands they're associated with.
Yeah, and I think the perfect example of that is the infamous Kendall Jenner Pepsi ad from 2017. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget?
I mean, the ad basically showed Kendall Jenner handing a Pepsi to a police officer during a protest, and it was supposed to be this message of unity and peace, but it came across as incredibly tone-deaf and insensitive.
Yeah, it was a major misstep for Pepsi. I mean, it seemed like they were trying to capitalize on this really important social movement without actually understanding the complexities of the issue or the real-life struggles that people were facing.
It was like they thought they could just solve all the world's problems with a can of Pepsi.
Right, and it just backfired spectacularly. They got a ton of negative press, and it really damaged their brand image. I think that's a lesson that a lot of companies have learned the hard way in recent years. You can't just jump on any social trend or cause without being genuine and authentic in your messaging.
Totally. While Pepsi was busy chasing after the latest trends, Coca-Cola was taking a slightly different approach to celebrity endorsements. They definitely had their share of famous faces over the years, but their strategy seemed to be more focused on creating these iconic campaigns that weren't necessarily tied to the short-lived popularity of a particular celebrity.
Yeah, think about the Coca-Cola Santa Claus, right? That image is so ingrained in our culture that it's hard to imagine Christmas without it, and it's all thanks to Coke's advertising.
Right, or the Coca-Cola polar bears, those cuddly white giants, are another example of how Coke has been able to create these really enduring and beloved brand mascots that aren't reliant on the whims of celebrity culture.
Exactly, and I think that's a really smart strategy because it allows Coke to build these long-term emotional connections with consumers, rather than just chasing after the latest fads.
And it kind of reinforces that whole image of Coke as the classic, the original, the one that's always been there and always will be there,
Right, it's like Coke is saying, hey, we're not trying to be cool or trendy, we're just Coke and we're proud of it.
I like that. So beyond celebrity endorsements, both Coke and Pepsi have had their share of marketing wins and losses over the years. One of Coke's biggest successes in recent years has been the Share a Coke campaign, where they printed people's names on the bottles. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, that was a brilliant campaign. I mean, it was so simple but so effective. It really tapped into that human desire for personalization and connection.
Yeah, it made people feel like Coke was speaking directly to them, and it encouraged them to share their Cokes with friends and family and post about it on social media. It was a huge hit.
And it's a great example of how even a massive global brand like Coke can still find ways to connect with consumers on a personal level.
Totally. On the other hand, we have to mention the Kendall Jenner Pepsi ad again because it really stands out as one of the biggest marketing failures of recent times.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale for any brand that's thinking about wading into sensitive social issues. I mean, it's great to want to be part of the conversation and to use your platform for good, but you have to do it in a way that's authentic and respectful, and you have to be really careful not to trivialize or exploit the issue.
I think that's a really important point. So let's fast forward to the present day 2025, who's winning the cola wars right now. Well, if we're just looking at soda sales, Coca-Cola is still the global leader. They have the bigger market share, and their brand is still more recognizable worldwide.
But I think it's important to look at the bigger picture too, right? PepsiCo is actually a much larger company than Coca-Cola because they own a lot of other brands besides just Pepsi, like Lay's potato chips, Doritos, and Gatorade. So they're much more diversified than Coke.
That's true. I guess it's kind of like Coke is the star athlete who's only focused on one sport, while Pepsi is the multi-talented kid who's good at everything.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I think both companies have their strengths and weaknesses, but they both seem to be doing pretty well for themselves.
They definitely are. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Coke and Pepsi, I think the main takeaway is that this is a rivalry that's been going strong for over a century, and it shows no signs of slowing down.
It's a testament to the power of branding, marketing, and innovation. And it's a reminder that even in a world that's constantly changing, some things never go out of style.
Yeah, like a refreshing ice-cold cola on a hot day.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that at the end of the day, Coke and Pepsi are both basically just sugary carbonated water, right? But somehow they've managed to create these incredibly powerful and enduring brands that people are fiercely loyal to.
It's amazing what a little bit of branding and marketing can do. And I think it leaves us with a really interesting question to ponder. What is it about these brands that makes people so passionate about them? What is it about Coke and Pepsi that makes them so much more than just a drink? I guess that's something for you, the listener, to think about the next time you reach for a can of your favorite cola.
I think that's a great note to end on, food for thought.